Ninjago's given us all kinds of unique villains over the years, but no name strikes as much of a chord as Garmadon, the mascot antagonist of the entire franchise. This could be from his iconic forearms, incredible voice acting by Mark Oliver, or other more general elements, and while these are most likely correct, what I want to focus on here is why I think he works so well, and what makes him so different from any other antagonist I can even think of. I normally wouldn't expect the topic of addiction to come up in a Ninjago video, but in my opinion, Garmadon's constant need to be evil is a perfect representation of it. In the early seasons of the show especially, it's made clear to us that Garmadon doesn't necessarily want to be the bad guy. In fact, he does some pretty heroic things. He wants to keep his son safe, helps the ninja, stops the devourer, the list goes on. What makes it all so tragic is that despite his best efforts, Garmadon's unable to fight the venom infecting his body, and eventually gives back into it in season 2. The idea of Garmadon constantly struggling against his own evil instincts really grabs me. The good Garmadon has always been in there, he just wasn't strong enough to break free. So what does he do instead? He makes his classic goal of reshaping the world into his own image. His evil blood doesn't allow him to have a happy family life, making him so disconnected from what he truly wants that the only way for him to obtain it is to create his evil, twisted version of it so the devourer's venom can be satisfied. Garmadon was essentially trapped in his own shell, forced to constantly give in to his evil tendencies despite the fact that he knew what he was doing was wrong. The only other character I can think of who faced a similar issue is Zane during his time as the Ice Emperor. Zane ended up doing some pretty horrible things in the Neverrealm, but not through his own will. Vex would feed these twisted ideas into his head, and the scroll, much like the Devourer's venom, would influence him to the point of executing them, leaving Zane's helpful, friendly base programming trapped inside this easily manipulated shell of what was left of him, just like Garmadon's good conscience being overpowered by evil impulses. This, of course, would all be ended by Lloyd in the final battle, which leads us into the next chapter of Garmadon's life. We now enter a view of what could have been in Garmadon's life. We get to see the little snippet of what he's like without any evil influence as Sensei Garmadon, and he's actually a great guy. Right off the bat, we see how compassionate he truly is, with him instantly easily reconnecting with his son, leading the ninja in the absence of Wu, and even trying to build friendships with them. Remember Garmadon and Kai's rivalry in Season 1? Well, now Kai's probably the ninja he tries to help out the most besides Lloyd. In Season 4, he constantly reassures him about Skylar, because he knows how much Kai cares for her. Not only is he trying to make up for the destruction he's caused, he's trying to make up for the people he's hurt, bit by bit. Garmadon easily could have just brushed off all that he'd done and blamed it on the venom, but instead he tried to make up for it by trying to perform just as many good acts. Realizing he couldn't possibly accomplish all of that in his lifetime, he willingly sacrificed his second chance at life to save Ninjago, and eventually his life itself by reassuring Lloyd that it was okay to destroy the Preeminent while he was inside. This is the true, unfiltered Garmadon, and unfortunately for him, it's the only time we get to see it in the present. Throughout these seasons, we get to see how caring Garmadon really is, but like most good things in life, he isn't able to remain, and the perfect family life he always dreamed of is eventually ripped away from him. Enter Harumi. Harumi is easily both my favorite antagonist and character in Ninjago, so it's kind of hard for me not to just turn this whole video into a Harumi analysis, but I won't. I should totally make one though, she's so awesome. But she is such a horrible person and is single-handedly responsible for tearing apart the old image of Garmadon. That compassionate man that didn't want to be evil is gone now, and all that's left is his resurrected Oni side, the side that yearns for chaos and destruction and feels no sympathy for anyone, not even his own son. At this point, the audience is convinced that Garmadon's reached the point of no return. Only his Oni side was brought back, so he couldn't possibly be capable of caring, right? Right?
The Oni are incapable of caring.
No, Lloyd, as a matter of fact, they can, and thanks to Vinny the Goat, Garmadon is inspired to look into this. Now we've reached March of the Oni, which is easily the most pivotal point in modern Garmadon's story. While Sons of Garmadon and Hunted gave us this extremely brutal and entertaining villain to watch, he was just that, a villain. That previous arc of his humanity struggling to break free has been reset, and this is what we have left. When we're reintroduced to Garmadon in Season 10, we can already see that whether he realizes or not, he's starting to go down the same arc once again. He's much more expressive, witty, and doesn't just instantly try to destroy everyone he sees anymore. Despite all of this, Garmadon still very much views himself as an evil warlord and the one true conqueror of Ninjago, so much to the point that he thinks all who share the same goal need to be put down, which is exactly where the Omega comes in. The Omega gets a lot of hate for being too straightforward and not having enough depth, and while this description does match his character, I love him for it, because of the role he plays in Garmadon's story. Up until now, resurrected Garmadon's never been humbled by someone who's more evil than him. The Omega comes in as this massive reality check for Garmadon. The Omega's even more evil. That expressiveness and range of emotions that have been building up within Garmadon since Hunted just can't be found within the Omega. He's a cold, heartless warmonger who only cares about ruling the realms. At first, Garmadon sees this and thinks, oh well, he's just like me, but the Omega eventually points out that this is not the case at all, because after struggling to understand Vinny's speech about the values of life, Garmadon had begun to try to understand humans, and as the Omega says, be one of them. The scene during the final fight where the Omega is just wailing on Garmadon and taunting him is amazing, because someone is finally telling Garmadon what's really going on inside of his head. This uncaring, resurrected form of him that we thought was void of any of the old Garmadon, it's actually just subconsciously trying to undergo the same story arc that he did in his first life, just in a much different way. Instead of him fighting against the corruption of the Devourer, he's fighting against his Oni nature and trying to look past his destructive impulses. Because when he sees what he could become in the form of the Omega, he honestly seems kind of scared. What's more is that when talking to Lloyd and Wu and Crystalized, he mentions the Omega by name instead of just grouping him together with the other Oni. I think this is because of the impact he left on Garmadon. Facing the Omega was like looking through a dark, twisted mirror of himself that made him realize that maybe he didn't want to continue down that path. That, of course, wasn't the only thing that sparked his thinking. Another point that I just can't skip over is Cole's fall, because without it, Garmadon wouldn't have even gone to Vinny. After seeing the ninja's heartbreaking reactions, Garmadon initially had no clue as to how they could focus on that instead of their own survival, but after getting a massive reality check from Lloyd, his curiosity on the topic is sparked. This actually provides a pretty insightful look into his Oni side. All this time we've been thinking of him as a conqueror, but at the end of the day, he was really a survivor. Garmadon was more or less only trying to take over Ninjago so he could push back the Oni from slipping in once the balance shifted. Now, this is not meant to make Garmadon sound noble. In fact, it's the opposite. Well, yes, he is trying to quote-unquote protect Ninjago, he's doing it through a horrible strategy, filling in the destruction side of the balance by himself. To him, this is the only way to survive, but after Cole's fall, Lloyd's reaction, Vinny's speech, and the Omega's criticism, Garmadon starts to wonder if there really is more to life than surviving. Garmadon continues further down the path of humanity in his comic series, taking place sometime between seasons 10 and 15. In this, he once again faces a reality check type villain, this time being Lord Mogra, who's stolen his helmet and recruited the Sons of Garmadon, his old faction. Garmadon ends up protecting the people of Two Moon Village, originally to prove that he's better than Mogra, but eventually to prove that he seeks more than self-validation. He seeks redemption. I won't go too deep into the series here out of respect for those who haven't read it, but if that is the case, I highly recommend checking it out. It's a beautifully written extension of Garmadon's story that exhibits probably one of my favorite depictions of him yet. Of course, now we've reached the point where the show checks back in on him. The series revisits Garmadon and Crystalized, and it's clear that a lot has happened since March of the Oni. He's now fully set on trying to think like a human again, and even though he may not have all of the memories of Sensei Garmadon, being like that is still most likely his desire. Even with Lloyd's constant rejection of him, he still doesn't lose sight of his goal to be a better person, and instead of helping the ninja for his own gain, he's doing it to save Ninjago from the Overlord, plain and simple. That's not something we've seen from him since season 5. He's actively dedicating himself to a good cause again, despite how horribly evil he was just a couple years ago. And the most impressive thing about all of this is that in the end, despite everything he'd done to his son in the past couple years, he was able to win Lloyd back. When we see them happily rebuilding the monastery together in Crystalized, he somehow managed to just about bring himself back to that family life he dreamed of all those years ago. The most incredible thing about all of this is that it makes sense. I've just gone over 3 different forms of Garmadon: his original self, his purified self, and his resurrected self. And even with the other forms we've seen him in factored in, it's still easy to follow how he's gotten from point A to point B. Throughout its initial 12-year run, Ninjago was able to give us a tragically written broken villain that didn't want to be evil, a compassionate man trying to make up for his wrongdoings, and a reborn combination of both of these, with a new twist on the arc. I haven't seen this many variations of a single character drawn together so well in any other franchise, and just like Ninjago itself, Garmadon's strongest ability is to keep going on strong throughout all these changes. I'm honestly super excited to see what Garmadon does next, even if it's just him being good again. If we could somehow reach that Sensei Garmadon point, maybe with him shapeshifting back into his human form, that would be perfect. But in the meantime, I hope we can see some kind of deep resolution between him and Lloyd, as well as him reconnecting with Wu, Masako, and even Harumi. Being my 4th favorite character, this was a lot of fun to throw together, and I hope you found it interesting. Be sure to leave a like and consider subscribing if you enjoyed or would like to see more, because I'm planning on returning to a decently consistent upload schedule with more analysis type vids, as well as some custom LEGO vids and mock reviews. All that being said, I'd like to thank you all for making it this far, and I'll see you in the next video.